Hey everybody, this is Josh. Me and Astro's down here getting ready to feed the worm bins. Figured I'd just make a real quick video on what we feed them and how I feed them and everything. But what we have here is, I've got the 1 gallon ice cream tubs. And I've got all of our food scraps that I save in it. It's got old lettuce and old apples. Got a few little oranges. Has some pineapple. I know you're not supposed to feed them citrus, but I just give them very little. On top's jack-o'-lantern. Just, you can feed them anything. I feed them anything except for onions. I don't put any onions in there, and put very little citrus. I put apple or tomatoes, which they really do love tomatoes. But we also have a cup of old coffee grounds that I use because I drink a whole lot of coffee, and then I have homemade worm chow that has a bunch of different grains and stuff in it, and has oyster shells, egg shells, stuff like that in there to help give them some calcium and grit. But I'll make a video on that soon, next time I have to make a batch of it. For my bedding material, I use tore up cardboard. I just sit there while I watch TV and tear all our cardboard boxes up in little pieces and use it. And then I have live bedding material, which is just active with beneficial bacteria and stuff. That's just aged horse manure. I don't know if you can see that good, but that's aged horse manure that I've just screened through a little compost screen I've got. And then we have some finished screen compost that I like to throw in there for them for some live bedding every so often. But we'll give you a look at the worms here before we start feeding them. But what I do is I feed half of this bed at a time. I peel all this cardboard back, layer the food in, so I'll explain how I layer the food and everything here in a little bit. But I basically just feed half of the bin at a time. Then the next feeding I feed the other half. That way if there is something in there they don't like pineapple and all that stuff, they can run from it until it's broke down enough for them to eat it. But let's get a little, I don't know if you'll be able to see this good or not, but we'll dig through there and give you a look at the castings. This is where I fed them last, probably about I'd say a week and a half ago maybe. See if we can dig down in there and find some of them. I don't know how good this camera will take the picture, but there's scads of them in there. Loads and loads of them. But that's where I fed them last. There's still a few pieces of food and stuff left, but this time we're going to feed the other half of the bin. This is a stackable bin that I made. I still got to make one more tray to put on it. I'm going to make a video on how I made the bin and how I set it up and everything once I make that last tray for it. But it's basically like any store-bought stackable bin you'll get, but it's a 2 foot by 2 foot bed. It has pretty good lot of surface area. I put it on casters so I can roll it up under my other bed here and get it out of the way. This is the bathtub bed, some people calls it. It's basically just a big tote bin that they call it. I used to have a couple of the Rubbermaid bins, but I wasn't real crazy about them, so I switched over to this. But you basically just feed up one half of the bed at a time until it is processed, and then you switch over and start feeding the other side, and in a few months the first side will be ready to harvest. This is the side that I had a while back. This is just finished worm castings, just ready to be used or put out in the garden or whatever. Don't really have any worms in it. You might find 1 or 2, but 90% of them is migrated over to the other side. But I pull out of here every now and then and make seed starting mix and stuff like that out of it. Get it out as I need it, but I'll be swapping sides here soon. And I put these pieces of wood on the half of the bed that I fed the last time, so I don't forget. But this bed, pretty well like the other one. It seems to get a lot more mites and stuff in it for some reason, but the worms don't mind. But dig around in there, I don't know if you can see all the worms that's in it, but there's scads of them in there. Lots and lots of wings. I wouldn't have a clue how many I got. I bought 2,000 worms when I first started. Had one little Rubbermaid tote, but that's been a couple years ago, so been going for a while. But let me get this camera set up on a tripod here so I can show you what I'm doing, and I'll show you how I feed them and layer all the food in and everything. You're gonna have to move, little buddy. Basically, I feed one side at a time, like I said a minute ago, and I give each bed a gallon of the food scraps. basically pull most of this back. I leave the bits that's still wet and stuff in it, and leave a little bit at the bottom to help soak up some of the juice that comes from the food scraps so the bed don't get too wet. But I rake all this back, most of it anyway. Get down there pretty close. Leave some of this dry stuff so it'll soak up the moisture from the food. Most food scraps is that you get out of your kitchen anyway is high moisture content, so you don't want to drown all your worms. But basically, that's what I do. I peel all that back, leave a little bit of the, get over Astro, leave a little bit of the bedding in the bottom there. Then I take some of my dry worm food and just dust it in the bottom. This gives them grit and gives them a bunch of calcium and stuff, help reproduction, and gives them grit for their gizzard and everything. They seem to like the grain really good too. But I dust me about I think about a quarter cup in the bottom of that. Then I dump about half of my food scraps in that I'm going to feed them. See, there's corn cobs, there's a few potato peels in there. They seem to mold instead of getting broke down good, but I basically just take a piece of cardboard and spread this out. A lot of people say don't feed them citrus, like the oranges. Don't feed them pineapple, but I fed it to them plenty of times and they don't seem to mind. I don't load it up, like I won't put a whole bunch of pineapple or like this whole entire feeding of nothing but pineapple or nothing but tomatoes or anything, but give it to them sparingly. Now melons, stuff like that, they absolutely love. But on top of that, I put me a nice dusting of coffee grounds. I usually do about half this cup per bed. So I'll do about half of the coffee grounds I plan on putting in there. And then, with this bed, I put a pretty good lot of live material. The other bed, I put not very little, but I put a decent amount of the bedding in it, the live bedding. But it is started and based off of about 3 or 4 inches of this composted manure anyway, so I don't really put a whole lot in it. But this bed, where it's stackable and you're constantly building, I like to put a pretty good lot of the live material. I put a layer of that, basically just halfway cover it. I usually end up putting a whole container this size, which is about 2 quarts I think, so about half the volume of the food scraps I'm putting in there. Then on top of that, I put another roughly quarter cup of my homemade worm chow. I don't know if you can see all that, but I'll make a video on this soon once I have to make some more. I put me another dusting of it. Live material helps activate the food scraps with bacteria. It helps it break down quicker so the worms can get to it. Then I just do the same layer over again with the other half of my food scraps. Roughly half. Spread it out. Halfway, it's alright. Then I put some more of my coffee grounds on there. And I cover it over with cardboard. And then usually add me a couple more handfuls of fresh cardboard on top of it. I like to leave a real thick layer of dry bedding on it to kind of cut down on fruit flies and makes the worms want to stay down and holds moisture in and everything for them. So, seems to work pretty good, but that's basically it on that bed. Like I said, I do put more of the live material in that bed than I do in the other bed, but the other bed starts off with a 4 to 6 inch layer of manure in the bottom, aged horse manure or compost in the bottom of it to start, so I don't put as much live material in it. Every time I feed it, I put about half. Okay, and this bin, which is my horizontal migration bin, I pretty well do the same thing. I rake back the cardboard. Hope I don't have this camera over. And you can see I've got a good 3 or 4 inches of cardboard bedding on there. I rake back most of the cardboard. I'll leave a decent layer of it down. But what they've already gnawed into and what's good and wet, I do put torn up paper in there, some office paper and stuff. But basically, pull that cardboard back. Got some crappy lighting over here, don't I? Yep. But anyway. Basically, pull this cardboard back. I do the same thing I did in the other one. I start out with about a 1/4 cup of my dry worm food. I only feed half of this half at a time, if that makes sense. I feed this side, whole side, for about 3 months. And then I will swap feeding the other side, which gives the worms time to hatch out, the cocoons that's still over here to hatch out, and all the worms to finish what's in this side and then migrate over to where the food is. That way you're not digging through worm castings harvesting. You can just scrape out the whole half and use it. Which I'll make a video on it whenever it comes time to do that this spring. I'll rake out the side that is already finished that I showed a minute ago and show you loading it back up and swapping sides and all that stuff. But after that, I put about half of my food scraps in there, roughly. About half of my food scraps. Usually, I feed them about once a week. During the winter time, I'll feed them every other week usually. But whenever it's warm down here, 80, 90 degrees, during the summer, they'll go through this gallon and all the other stuff I put in here. They'll go through that in about 5 days. But during the winter, when it's cooler, it only stays about 50 down here. I only keep it about 50 down here. So it takes them sometimes a week and a half, 2 weeks to go through this much food. But I just keep an eye on it and feed them when they need fed. You don't want to overfeed them. But I put half of my coffee grounds in there. And then I put a live bedding, which I don't put as much live bedding in this one, like I said, as I do the other one, because it is based off of horse manure. So I usually only put about half of this container of material, which is about 1/4 in between. That gives them a little bit of other material to gnaw into. They really like the aged horse manure and the compost. Then I put another layer of my dry worm food on top of that. And the rest of my food scraps. spread them out decent, so not in any big clumps or anything. Put the rest of my coffee grinds in there. A little moldy, but won't hurt nobody. And that's pretty well it. Cover it back over with my cardboard. Put me a couple more handfuls of fresh cardboard on there. In good shape. Worms do seem to love cardboard. They get up in little cracks in it and lay their cocoons, and helps cut down on pests in there. It just works real good. You can use shredded paper. I've used shredded paper before, and I used to leave the top bare and just put newspaper over top of it. But it seemed to attract more pests that way. But that's pretty well it. That's how I feed my bins. I do that about once a week. So, thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, anything, just leave them in the comment box below, and give me a thumbs up if you like the video, and subscribe to our channel. Astro.